be an infinite number of ways to waste your time and money in politics. I don't intend to try to prove it, but just about any major, engagement level that you can touch in politics, I've tried to get in on. Third party, 1980, and candidate campaigns, party work, reorganizing parties, issue work, and the biggest one I did before working with Mark was the term limits movement. I drafted a memo recommending that we take initiatives on term limits to every state. Initiatives where the states would limit the terms of their own congressional delegations only. It's a great idea. Terry Considine came up with it in Colorado. So by May of 1995, 23 states in the Union had limited the terms of their own congressional delegations. An amazing thing to do, because arguments, I remember the fun polling on this thing. Polling question: if you impose term limits in your states, you're going to lose your most senior representatives. Does this make you more likely or less likely to support? More likely one. So contra the claims of the condescending media who say that, people say they don't like Congress, but they love their own guy. People, when given a choice about the structure, would prefer to limit their terms and have turnover. That's been pervasive ever since it was polled in the early 1950s. We don't have it, which is a sign of that we don't have representative government. And those 23 states, by the way, on May 23rd, 1995, the U.S. Supreme Court voted 5-4 that the states cannot limit the terms of their own delegations. They did it with a paragraph written by the recently deceased Justice Stevens, saying that voters get to choose who represents them. In this twisted decision, Kennedy was the swing vote against us in a 5-4. Justice Thomas, the great Justice Thomas, wrote a terrific dissent. So they threw away 3 years of work and millions of dollars, and most importantly, millions and millions of votes of people across the country, and basically said incumbent members of Congress have a special right to access to the ballot. A really horrible decision. It was just plain wrong on the Constitution, and it's one of the reasons we got stuck. At the time, by the way, 1993, the House of Representatives had been in Democratic hands since 1954 to 1994. There was a lot of frustration, and I think the whole history of the country would have been changed had the states been able to limit terms of their own delegations. So I was stymied on that. Then we tried, but actually before that, I got to speed up a little, because in the 80s, one of my forays was to try to get an Article 5 convention for a balanced budget amendment. And actually,
Are we in trouble? Are we going to explode? What's going on there?
I think, yeah.
With Eric, that's possible.
Sadly true. Balanced budget amendment, National Taxpayers Union had been promoting one since the 70s, Article 5 applications. They got to 32 states, quietly, by the way. So that's one of the reasons that I'm not in favor of us doing this quietly. They did it quietly, and then we had 2 more states to go, and I was engaged in trying to help them in Ohio and Kentucky, and something that won't shock you. This is 1985. So we're in the capitals, Kentucky and Ohio, and who is there to testify against us? Phyllis Schlafly, John Birch Society, and the AFL-CIO.
Strange bedfellows. All together again.
Yeah, and so this coalition blocked us, killed us, and since then some people repealed and so forth. So we saw that basically they didn't bring muscle till it got close, and it really wasn't as close as it looked. Fast forward to that decision I just mentioned, the horrible 5-4 decision. So we decided, with my recommendation, hey, let's do Article 5. So on term limits, we started to push around the country for Article 5 applications, not doing it low profile. We tried to, it just didn't do well. And I had viewed term limits as a shortcut to reviving representative government. Part of the reason was that in studying the 19th century American political system, I saw that turnover was high. It used to be called rotation in office. And I made what it would be called in Latin a post hoc error. I thought if we can recreate the turnover of the 19th century, will contain the government as it was contained then. Incredibly, government spending, the best estimates I can get, state, local, federal, in 1800 was about 4%, almost all, by the way, state and local, 4% of the economy. And in 1890, it was 5%. And that's after the Civil War and the crackdown. So incredible, this dynamic, booming country, booming population, and government is contained, and there's high turnover in the legislature, and the average time served in the U.S. House of Representatives at the beginning of a session in the 19th century was 2.2 years. 2.2 years. So I thought, well, let's recreate that. Well, so we did it. We started we did Congress and state legislatures, both. And today, after history that I'll skip, 15 states have state legislative term limits as a consequence of that movement. And I must say, I'm disappointed in the results of that. One of the states is California.
Don't really need to say anymore, do you?
It's unfair of me to look at this Texan when I think of California, but he's only been a Texan for half a year.
Yep.
It's just been disappointing. So actually, the discipline that forced rotation in office, that caused Abraham Lincoln to be a one-term member of the House, for example, was state party discipline, state party mandatory rotation from the old state parties. And that's a long-gone party system where the voters didn't have to pay much attention to the candidates because the parties were the nominators and the information providers and the creators of newspapers, the recruiters, the trainers, and the candidates were agents, representatives of the party. And that system was blown up by who? The progressives deliberately attacked it, legislated it out of existence in various ways from 1895 to 1910, which I'll skip here. But so I had already studied this history because my political progression was, find a problem, grab what I know, attack and do something, lose and go back and then read and study and figure out why I lost. So
let's go to where we intersect, because this is one of the favorite stories of my political life. So Eric reached out to me through a third party that we both knew and asked to have a meeting with me. This is during the height of the Tea Party. And so at this point I'd become cynical and paranoid, both. And both totally justified, I'd like to add. And so I didn't know who Eric was, and so I did some research, and I found some guy that he had worked with that I really didn't like. And so I said to the intermediary, tell Eric I'm not interested in meeting with him. And so she did, and Eric was very insistent, and she came back and said, he really wants to meet with you. And I said, look, just tell him that he worked with this guy, and because of that, I'm really not interested in meeting with him. And so she went back and told him, and he sent a message back, and the message was, tell Mark I like him even more for saying that. I don't work with him anymore. I thought, okay, I'll meet with this guy. So we met, and I fell in love with him as a person, and I understood his love for the country, his patriotism, his intellect, his fascination with history, which I had only recently become fascinated with, so I was able to start learning from him immediately, and we started working together in the early Tea Party days. And so when Mike Farris brought Convention of States to us, one of the first people that I wanted to give me his opinion on it, because I had now sort of bought in, was Eric. Because if Eric had said, no, we can't do this, then I would have said no. At this point, by the way, we had formed up Citizens for Self-Governance. I'm skipping ahead because we have a limited amount of time. We formed up Citizens for Self-Governance. This is the blessing of somebody like Eric, who's such a great patriot. When I was leaving the Tea Party Patriots, and there's all kinds of stuff going on, I was getting ready to leave politics, and Eric and Tim Dunn said to me, you need to stay in politics. We need you in. And I said, I have no idea what to do. And they said, that's okay, we'll figure out how to fund it. That's rare, I just want you to know. So I was really blessed. So we started doing stuff. I don't know if you guys know this, but with Eric's help and Tim Dunn's help, we sued the IRS. You guys know that? Yeah. It was another impossible thing.
Actually, I'm glad Mark steered back to this. By the way, we sued the IRS using the law firm that handled my fight in Wisconsin and knocked down the law and got a decision that said the whole prosecutorial attack was conducted without foundation in reason or law in a state Supreme Court ruling. So the Graves Garrett firm out of Kansas City, great patriot firm. But here's a piece of this. So Tim Dunn will be speaking to us Sunday morning. Has been a key part of this. Tim had known Mike Ferris from back to early HSLD days. He had homeschooled his 6 children when it was kind of a pioneering thing to do. And Tim is in the oil business out of Midland and a part of the fracking, horizontal fracturing revolution. And this is just a tiny peek into that industry that I used to find more puzzling than I do now because I've tried to study it. But Tim said 5-6 years ago, he said, oh, people from foreign oil companies come over here and we let them look, we show them what we're doing, tell them what we're doing. And these are big, companies out of the Middle East and out of Europe. And I said, oh, and are they going to be able to do anything with it? And he said, no, they won't be able to replicate it. It requires the American system. It requires the private property and a really complex array of small companies. And a big centralized company coming in here, they won't be able to have the efficiencies that we have here. Now, he took me to a fracking site a few years ago, and Croncrest, which is a big operator in the whole Permian Basin, they used, I believe, 35 different companies over a 3-week period to drill a frac site, and Croncrest had 1 employee on site. 1 employee sitting in a trailer thing looking at a computer. Just 1. And so this is a fabulously rich orchestration, customized by even 100 miles away, they might have a little different mix. Part of what he showed me, by the way, was sand from Wisconsin out in West Texas, because we have the best sand, by the way.
What a claim to fame, Eric.
We have no oil. We have Ottawa White, round, hard sand. It holds up better at depth. So this is Tim, who has analyzed the structure, trained in geology. When I met him, he was pretty new to politics, and I had found many ways to fail. So he would come up with these ideas, and I would say, no, that won't work, that won't work, that won't work. That's what kind of the refrain for a while. Then we got with Mark, and we had these neat meetings where Tim would help draw these charts on. He's a structure system guy. Structure system, not personnel. What's the structure? People work within a structure. Often, they don't understand the structure they're in. I bet you run into this with state legislators, by the way. They don't actually know their authority. They kind of don't know what they're doing, and we can't really hold that against them. We have to just work with it. So we do this kind of stuff he did in the oil business with government, and before the talk with Mike, we had already come to the point where we understood the very limited leverage points, primary elections, just very limited, and how most types of engagement feed the system. The system evolved to respond to lobbying, reinforces it, all kinds of things reinforce it. That's what Mark ran into as a Tea Party leader when he went to Washington. They were just going to suck him up, treat him nice. He could meet with the speaker, he could have been wined and dined, he could have made good money, and he could have just joined the system and then been turned around, like most congressmen, turned around and become basically a sales rep for the swamp. But Mark didn't do that, and the reason I persisted in trying to get with Mark Meckler is because a couple years into Tea Party fame, the guy had not been sucked up by the Republican part of the swamp. So I thought, this guy's different.
Different is correct.
Yeah. But I had no answers. Now I want to come to Mike Ferris and just say that. So and Mark was almost kind in saying I had 30 years in politics because, by the way, it's now 40. But so I have 40 years of a lot of political engagement, and so I can't actually remember another time when a person changed my mind on something significant politically in a phone call. It's just really hard to do. I don't want to discourage people from calling me with ideas, by the way, but it's one thing, a new idea of a way to do things. Mark and I know that most decisions of how to do things in your states, you're going to have to make. What to do, what steps and so forth. But in terms of strategy, for someone to change my mind is like, there's just not much point. And in one phone call, Mike Ferris changed my mind. So Tim knew him from Homeschool Legal Defense. I had already shot down several Tim ideas, so we just knew. By the way, we had come to this thing. What is the big question in politics? And this is a big, big dividing line. It's between policy and process. Policy and process. This is a process operation. Our concern is who decides. Who decides? Where's the locus of power? Who decides? Who decides? Who decides? Politicians are trained by consultants to use policies as sales props. That's the business of political marketing is largely trying to study the voters and pick policies and claims and use them to get into power and then do whatever you want to do. That's just the corrupt system that has evolved. So actually, there's not much of a cue based on what politicians say as to what they'll do. Not much of a cue. In fact,
hey, Eric, what did Mike say to you that convinced you? Because I mean, you came into that conversation opposed to not opposed for the same reasons that we hear all the time, but opposed because you just didn't feel like it would work.
Well, I was 0 for 2, right? I was 0 for 2 on application. So here were the two key things. The first was, so how are you going to get these applications? Well, we're going to have at least 100 engaged people in every state legislative district in the country.
Sound familiar?
Yeah.
The plan. Right?
At least 100 engaged people. Now, I had matured enough in life not to say what I thought at the time, by the way. What I thought was, there's 350 House districts in New Hampshire, and there's not very many in California, so it's not going to be 100 per district because we don't need 35,000 people in New Hampshire, and we might need 35,000 in California. I didn't say it, and I'm really proud of myself. So, because that's actually kind of a nitpicky thing, and Ferris would have known that, right? He would have known. You just adjust a little bit. But that's a lot of organized people. But here was the line that really got me, because I said, so because Article 5, it's just a phrase in there, and Congress shall call. And I said, what if we get 34 applications and Congress does nothing? What do we do? And this is what Ferris said. We have a convention. And that... There's so much in that sentiment. There's so much in that sentiment because we don't need their permission. And fundamentally, where we come from, we don't need their permission. We don't need anybody's permission. And to go back to something I know that was dealt with at length last night, but the single most important word, this is a recent opinion of mine. This is not a religious point I'm going to make. It's really not. I have been in my life a Catholic, an agnostic, an atheist, a Christian, and a Catholic. That's where I am now, by the way. So all of those times, I was determined to govern myself, all of those times. And I know people in each of those categories. So I'm making a political point out of the capital letter endowed by our Creator, the capital letter, written by basically probably a deist, Jefferson, and approved by a deist, definitely a deist, Franklin, okay, Creator. Because where does that put our authority, our ability, our right to govern ourselves? It's not from any government. That's what that's saying. It's saying we have it, and you can, wherever it came from, it's not from our fellow men. We don't need anybody's permission to govern ourselves. That is in there, endowed by our Creator. And so, Mike knew it. He knew it. And Mike also, and then I got to put it back to Mark, but no, what Mike did was civil disobedience with Homeschool Legal Defense Association. Because, why? Because parents are endowed by their Creator with the right and duty to raise their children as they see fit. And so he did it, and then he challenged the government. And by the way, Homeschool Legal Defense Association said, just sign up with our group, and if the government comes after you, we will represent you pro bono. Okay, that was it. So he knew there would be some fights, but there wouldn't be a million attempts to get, to imprison parents. So, and they won litigation through time, they won politically. When they tried to strengthen the law against homeschooling in Montana, 5,000 people went to Helena, which I believe is about a third of the population of Helena, Montana. It's so muscle. So Mike is saying this to me, and then just to segue a little bit, so I also had that example, and when Mark, and I feel slightly guilty about this, but Mark and Tim have been totally supportive of me, but this was going to be my main thing to do nationally when we decided to do it in the summer of 2013. And October 3rd, 2013, government officials in the dark in Wisconsin did 5 raids, 4 on family homes, and gagged me, said I couldn't talk about it, and I was threatened with jail. That was October 3rd. And I was taken out of that and had to do a full-time other political fight, out of which I've learned a lot. And so I also, in the wake of Jim too, I had to commit civil disobedience. But what I was defying a judge's gag order with risk of contempt of court under Wisconsin law. But as I said in many interviews, I have the right to speak. I am defying an unconstitutional gag order. And what I would say to us in our political troubles, and what I thought when I thought about, hey, I could coast here, I could coast, right? They just wanted me to point to donors and politicians and say, oh yeah, they were doing some bad stuff, which they weren't, but I could have kept my profile lower. I could have hidden behind a tree. I didn't even consider that for a minute. And this, I know, everyone I know has this attitude, and I was in very unusual, favorable circumstances to fight it. I don't believe that what I did was, I believe I did what I had to do and what you would have done if you were in my circumstances. They were great circumstances to push back because my 35 years of political connections, networking, I was able to find lawyers, raise money, get to the Wall Street Journal, do a ton of stuff that other people just couldn't do. So I was positioned to do it, perfectly positioned to do it. So I got to blow it up. But here's where we are in the country. If it's as bad, if it's so bad, they're going to send people in the dark to family homes. And if they're going to throw me in jail, I want to know it. I don't want to duck it. If that's how it is, I want the fight now.
That's why you're here, because we know you want the fight now too. Now, we're going to go to questions here in a couple of minutes, and we're going to be doing this in every plenary session. Do you have cards at their table, Rita? Or we have people. So if you want to ask a question, raise your hand. We have people who will be passing out cards and pens, and you can write that question down. Please keep it brief, and then those will come to the front of the room and be sorted so that we can answer as many as we can. We also have some.
Yeah, and I just want to say, I'd like the questions that don't get answered. They can be emailed to me later to mark me, okay?
Okay.
So I don't want them to go unanswered. We'll only answer a few here, but.
Yep. So those will be collected and brought up front, and we'll answer some of those. We also have some that were submitted online. Before we go to the questions, Eric, there's one last kind of big picture question that I want you to address. Something you and I have been talking about a lot lately offline. By the way, this is something that we do all the time. Eric and I and Tim, that's kind of the core of the board. Patty with us, Eric's wife, Leslie Graves, who runs Ballotpedia, by the way. If you guys don't know about Ballotpedia, you should know about Ballotpedia, right? Great organization. And we have these philosophical discussions literally about everything: philosophy, religion, family, politics, physics, you name it. We talk about all of it, but we talk a lot lately about where are we headed as an organization. What does it mean to be part of this broader organization? Because you've seen this, that's the new slogan on our buttons. It says Convention of States still, but it says it's more than a convention. And so we want to talk a little bit about what that means and what the broader vision is for the organization, because I can just tell you for sure it's not enough to call a convention. That's just not enough. We're just getting started, and I know we're not there yet. We're going to get there, but we're still just getting started. So Eric, you want to talk a little bit about the broader vision?
Yeah, and by the way, Convention of States, I've loved it ever since that Ferris phone call. It so richly captures, it reaches back to the founding and to the principles touched on last night and today too, right? It says, look, it's our country. We get to govern ourselves, and the decisions about it should be made as close to home as possible, in the family, in the county, in the state. The federal government was created by the independent states that had fought and won the revolution. That's who created it. They sent delegates to Philadelphia. It was created in order to create a more perfect union to protect our rights. So it invites us to remind that and to go to a state legislator, and ask them to fix the country. They're used to people coming in and saying, could you fix the road in front of my house, or could you fix the school? We're asking them, look, could you take on the responsibility you have? You don't say this, I think, but by going to the state legislature, you are stepping up as a citizen and owning a piece of your state and your national government, and you're asking the legislator to step up. You're probably the first person that told them that he actually had the authority to reign in the federal government, but it's okay that they don't know that yet. They all know it. So COS is big. It's on our banner out there. It's a solution as big as the problem. But what we were in Austin last week with Patty discussing and Brad Cameron talking about this. And Mark, my overall reaction and Brad's afterwards is you're ahead of us. You want more. You want in states that have passed applications. You want more. You want more tools, you want more guidance on what to do. In states that haven't or that are remote, Illinois, New York, California, what can you do? There are ways to be a citizen every week, every day of the year. We've been short, I think, of serving, and so we're really excited about some of the. Do you want me to mention some of the things we're talking about, or?
Yeah, briefly.
Yeah, because
this stuff will be coming down the pike, and remember what we're talking about today. Obviously, we're a 501c3 organization, so we're talking about educating you on how to do these things generally.
Yeah, and by the way, as we love the process fight, who decides. The most important thing about a convention of states is a convention of states. It's not any particular amendment. Having a convention of states, convening one, will transform the debate, the narrative. It'll mean that all those reporters that live in Washington, D.C. and go to parties there won't be able to cover America from Washington, D.C. anymore. So it's the convention. It's the process of asserting our authority. So, but some people, and Mark loves y'all, knows y'all, and is very protective of you, by the way, I can tell you, because if he thinks I'm suggesting that he get you to do something, he'll say, I don't tell them what to do. And I don't tell people what to do either. I don't even tell Mark what to do. But we're going to offer ways for citizens to engage, and you and anyone you deal with can do what component of citizenship you want to. I do believe that it's a fulfilling key part of being a human being to engage in governance on some level. But people choose their own level. So a couple of things, Mark. I'm going to talk about juries for a minute and then throw it back to you. But so one of the things I've become more interested lately as I've become an expert on the messed up criminal justice system, which has, in America, we have assembly line injustice, in my view. I don't like prosecutors. I've sued prosecutors and I've seen them smear, lie. And one of the things that came out of the John Doe, by the way, is I got to work with a lot of people at the Wall Street Journal, Kim Strassel included, and Jim Jordan read about it, Representative Jim Jordan. So part of the educational process of the John Doe fight helped people better understand what was going on in the national effort to undo an election, that's all the whole Comey-Mueller thing was, a national effort to undo an election. And in Wisconsin, the whole John Doe was an effort to undo Walker's election and the change in union law.
Started by the FBI, right? FBI was engaged in that.
The FBI was at some of the raids in the John Doe. The FBI was there. They have the data. They won't give us. They have the seized information at the FBI. So I'm not too high on prosecutors, but jurors traditionally, historically, have authority to decide the facts and the law. This is little used. It's kind of and judges and prosecutors steer them wrong. So we want to. I want to have a project that I think CSG is going to adopt, of just educating people about the authority that jurors should have. Today, jury duty is viewed as a drudge thing, and in fact, judges and prosecutors try to turn jurors into rubber stamps. And they actually tell them in instructions, you only are to decide the facts, not the law. That's not true. No juror, even in America, has ever been punished for voting not guilty. You as a juror can vote not guilty for whatever reason you want, because you don't like the prosecutor. So we have jurors sending people to 25-year sentences for minor drug violations who are not told it's going to be 25 years. They generally will hide that from the jurors, and they don't know that they don't have to send them there. And often what happens, just to take one type of example, and the prosecutors will typically try to turn people involved in any type of touching drugs into an informant. Okay, the informant gets to stay out there on the street, tilting things against the competitors. This is often what happens. They'll try to get into the competing drug dealers network and turn those guys in and actually become a bit of a part of the protection of their own operation. They're out there. Then they run into some poor sap asked to deliver drugs, and he won't talk. 25 years he can get. They're thrown in prison for not turning in somebody else. And the jurors know none of this. And our prisons have thousands of people in who just shouldn't be in. So anyway, jury and jury authority is a tremendously vital power, and jurors don't know it, and the insiders won't tell them. So this is like another example. You'll find it again and again in our lives. So here I'm going to make a sweeping claim. The biggest problem in America is people not acting with the authority they already possess. That's our biggest problem.
So what do you guys think of that idea? Okay, so Eric, I think we're going to go to questions now. Rita, do you have some questions you guys? Okay, we're going to start with a couple from the internet. We've got about 10 minutes left here, so we need to hustle through these, Eric. This comes from our Hawaii State Director, Mark White. What do you suggest Convention of States do at the national level to gain support of nationally recognized leaders and think tanks?
Well, nationally recognized leaders and think tanks, different answers. Nationally recognized leaders, we'll put that in quotes. Keep building, build it and they will come. The type of people that want to get elected office are looking out. Mark doesn't look over his shoulder, by the way. He doesn't look over his shoulder to try to figure out how to get in front of a group of people, right? But most people trying to get elected office, they have to do that. They have to look around and see what could get me elected, what could get me elected. We have to make it a thing that can get them elected, and they will come. Think tanks, that's a different thing. The think tanks that, there are lots of them. And I would just say some of them have even on the conservative side, have a kind of a centralized view that when it comes to national problems, their suits are the ones that need to fix it, and they have the ideas and the ways. And if they have that, and by the way, at the big ones like Heritage, there's an array of people, and some like this and some don't. But I would say that they have a little bit of a conflict of interest. As long as the problems are centralized in Washington, then the groups with headquarters in Washington have a bigger say in the debate than they otherwise would. So we can expect some resistance from the kind of parts of the swamp that are pretty cozy in the hot tub. And I wouldn't worry about those. Look, we are true to history. We're true about the rights that we have. And on think tanks too, what I would say, we have in the room and speaking this weekend some of the best thinkers in America on these issues. And the think tanks, the think tanks need to listen to us. That's what they need to do.
So I have a feeling that this question was planted by a hometown favorite because it says, should we have our next summit in Spring Green, Wisconsin? Obviously somebody who knows where you live. Not that that's secret anymore since the NSA has you under watch. I think this is a good one for you specifically. This is from Tate Feller, one of our volunteers in Utah. He says, tell us about the additional persecutions against your life, your property, your honor since the gag order incident.
Well, I'll just be kind of brief, but I'm still probing, I'm still learning more about the abuses. And I'll just tell one little thing. I mean, we really are, I was with Victor Davis Hanson a couple of months ago, and I thanked him for this amazing straddle he's doing, because he is a serious academic scholar, started the ancient world, Greece and so forth, and he writes columns and now increasingly goes on Fox News and talks about contemporary America. Unusual, and he does it, by the way, in a way that is very insightful, very much in tune with the American people. And I just thanked him for that. And I said, I really appreciate that. And he said, well, we live in revolutionary times. And Mark and I sometimes talk about the terminology. You know, a lot of terminology in politics is military. And I don't like us saying that we're in a war because I think that should be preserved kind of for the category of governments killing lots of people. But they're doing everything short of that quietly, relatively quietly, and as they did in the Doe and the Mueller thing. The revolutionary times, here's what he means by that. a substantial faction of elite Americans have walked away from the constitutional agreement about how we resolve disputes. The leaders of the Democratic Party today are not interested in being contained. They're not interested in ever giving up power. We haven't had this since the Civil War, where both sides thought they were standing kind of on the Declaration of the Constitution in their odd ways. That was really a fight of how do we govern ourselves. This one has a whole faction, the Democratic leaders, saying, you really can't take care of yourselves, we need to do it. So it's revolutionary times. And I decided over a year ago when Mueller was getting more and more attention, I realized, heck, he sent guys into some of the raids in Wisconsin. I'm going to ask for my FBI file. I did so, and it took them 10 months to reply. They sent one article about a political operation that I was involved in 2016. This is long after we won the John Doe fight. And then they checked 3 boxes on why they weren't going to tell me anymore. Possible ongoing investigation, sources and methods, and something else. I went to the law firm, I appealed, and they shut me down. So in America today, and my business is small and uninteresting. I've never had overseas business. I've never worked for a government or applied for a government job. And there's just no angle. The article was political, so the FBI has a file on me that they won't tell me the rest about, and it's about my political activities. And that is not good.
Yeah, this is a really interesting intersection with this organization with me is Eric and I have thousands of emails over the years, right? So thousands. So they got a hold of all his emails. I mean, we know that. So my emails are in there. So I asked about anything that the FBI has on me, and they don't have anything on me, except all of the emails Eric and I have ever exchanged, right? So this is really extraordinary, and we should be exceptionally concerned about this, right? I mean, the police state in the United States of America is out of control at every level. And there's a super important distinction I think we need to make here. I grew up in a law enforcement family. My mom was a reserve police officer in Los Angeles. A lot of you guys have met her. She's here. She retired as a sheriff's deputy in Nevada County, California. We love our local police. And most of the men and women on the front lines, most of them are good. But like any human organization, there are bad ones as well. And I think in a lot of cases, as they rise in the ranks and it becomes a political thing rather than a strictly community service kind of law enforcement thing, it gets pretty nasty. And we know that it's nasty at the national level. Look, we can see it in district attorneys' offices at the local level. They were involved in the John Doe. And we see it and this is a really important intersection for us that we have to recognize. Look, we're new to this idea, us in our community. More privileged people, middle-class people, upper-middle-class people, they've been abusing the inner cities for a long time. And the reason they're so good at this is they have a lot of practice.
A lot of practice, no pushback. By the way, in terms of the loyalty and attitude and the real warrior support of this organization and this operation, in the wake of, over the years since the John Doe, there were 5 targets of us that morning of October 3rd. And today, 2 of them work for Citizens for Self-Governance. One of them works for my wife's organization at Ballotpedia. And I'm one of them, and I was elected chairman of the board. That's what our board thinks about the prosecutors, by the way, so I'm chairman of the board. So the way that Tim and Mark stuck with me and Patty and, right from the beginning was just terrific. You don't know I stepped off a bit of a ledge there, and I wasn't concerned really with what my adversaries would do. I was concerned with my friends and my network, and they were tremendously supportive around the country, especially, I must say, the ones that didn't live in Wisconsin. But
So I want to do one last quick question and leave a little bit of time for wrap up. I think this is really important. How does one avoid the swamp when getting involved in politics?
You got to have a network, by the way. You got to have a network. Human society is very complex, and the system is evolving. It's a complex system. You must talk. You must raise things. And really, sometimes I think if you're really engaged and you're getting to have clout in your state, you're going to have things that you're not going to not know if it's like a friendly favor or something that might be maybe ethically questionable. Legislators are going to want to help you. They're going to help you. You have to talk to other people to decide whether that help is really helpful and whether it's good to do. George Washington was offered stock in an Ohio land play. I think just before he was elected president. Yeah, it was in the early 1780s. And he asked his friends, I'm worried about what the impact this might have on my reputation. So George Washington asked friends, and it was, that was a good question to ask. So all I would say is, by the way, in Wisconsin, I've sometimes been elevated, kind of like Mark did, and I appreciate nice things being said about me. Alone, I wouldn't be here. I'd be doing time, right, alone. So I asked more people for help in the subsequent 2 years than ever in the rest of my life. I asked for help. I told people. And so you can't go it alone. And by the way, this is part, apparently, of the plan of whoever it is that put us here, is that we must engage and have relationships in order to be fully alive and be fully human. This is like exciting, daring, somewhat risky, but we can step up and accept it the way it is and deal with this reality that we don't necessarily love, or we can just try to coast and ride off the capital of our great predecessors and kind of coast out. Probably most of us in this room have a pretty good life the rest of our life, unless you really have a conscience and care about the future.
So there are a ton more great questions. We'll give these to Eric. He'll address them. He's going to be hanging out, so if you see him in the hallway, feel free to talk to him. If you want to take these back and put your email address on it, Eric will try to get some of them answered. There's something that Eric and I talk about. I'm going to close the session with this, and then I'll make some announcements. There's a certain trait that is required of people who want to run with this pack. And the single word that we talk about all the time, and we see it in everybody who ends up attracted to what we do and is willing to be in the fight with us, and is the word defiance. We defy them to control us. They have no right. It is our natural right to control our own lives. That's what you see in us. This is one of my favorite quotes from the American Revolution. For Eric and I think we share this. Our favorite founding father, he's a very much of a rebel. We call him the narrator of the American Revolution, Sam Adams. Not a guy of privilege, not a successful business person or farmer or landed gentry. Just a regular guy and with his own share of problems. But he had an incredibly defiant attitude and a sense of narrative, maybe not repeated sense, really extraordinary. And this is one of the things he said. This is my personal favorite quote all time of Sam Adams. He said, speaking to the naysayers, by the way, so remember this. He said, if you love wealth better than liberty, the tranquility of servitude better than the animating contest of freedom, go home from us in peace. We ask not your counsels or your arms. Crouch down and lick the hands which feed you, and may your chains set lightly upon you, and may posterity forget that you are our countrymen. Pretty serious stuff. So a couple of announcements as we close. So we're going to take a 15-minute break. We're going to come back with another plenary session. We're going to get a chance to meet another one of our great friends, Pete Hegseth, who is with us this morning. Pretty cool. Feel free to say hello, and one last time give it up for our good friend and chairman of the board, Eric O'Keefe.
Thank you. Thank you. Well, that was fun.
Thank you.